Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are cracking open a topic that seems pretty straightforward on the surface. We're talking about an anatomical feature that, we don't often discuss in the context of big sweeping evolutionary science.
Right.
But when you do, you uncover this incredible universe of biological complexity, of energy trade-offs, and some really surprising insights into human mating status and even how we raise our children.
It's a perfect topic for a deep dive.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we are getting into the hidden story of the scrotum and testicles.
And it's one of those things where its apparent simplicity is what makes it so complex. When you really look, you realize this one organ is sort of a central hub for the body's energy budget.
A budget, I like that.
Yeah, and the source material we're working with today, it takes this amazing comparative approach. It explores the massive variation in testicle size across different species.
Not just primates.
Oh, from the oceans all the way up the primate family tree. And it connects that size directly to two major and often conflicting evolutionary pressures.
Okay, so our mission for you, listening, is to get beyond the biology textbook here. We want you to understand this organ not as some isolated piece of anatomy, but as a direct reflection of these intense reproductive strategies.
Exactly.
We're going to show how its size is literally the physical result of a trade-off. It's a choice. Do you invest your finite biological energy in big displays of status and dominance?
The badge.
Right, the badge. Or do you sink all those resources into just maximizing sperm output? And this is the really wild part, we'll explore the recent data that links that very physical choice to how human fathers actually behave.
And we can just, kick things off with one fact that immediately shows you what's at stake.
Go for it.
If you compare humans to our closest relatives and you adjust for body weight, the differences are just startling. Our testicles are about 3 times larger than a gorilla's.
A gorilla, which is this huge, powerful, dominant animal.
Right. But then you look at the chimpanzee and you realize the sheer energy they put into reproduction. Our testicles are only 1/5 the size of a chimp's.
1/5.
1/5. So you have this enormous 15-fold swing in reproductive investment just among the great apes. And that, right there, is the starting gun for this whole discussion.
Okay, let's unpack that. That is a monumental difference. But before we even get to size and strategy, we have to address the really fundamental question that makes this whole system seem so risky. Why are they external? I mean, from a safety perspective, it seems like an astonishing design flaw.
It's the perfect place to start because that external placement, housed inside the scrotum, it's the evolutionary constraint that dictates everything else we're going to talk about today.
So it's the non-negotiable part of the design?
It is. Unlike a lot of other big mammals, think about whales or an elephant, right? Their reproductive organs are safely tucked away inside the body.
Safe and sound.
Exactly. But humans, and most primates, we expose this absolutely critical machinery. The fact that evolution decided to accept that level of vulnerability tells you that the reason for doing it had to be, absolute.
And that reason, as we kind of hinted, is all about temperature.
It's all about temperature.
If the tissue could work just as well inside the body, evolution would have kept it there, no question. So the fact that it's external immediately tells you about this massive cost-benefit calculation that was made purely to optimize sperm.
It does. And when you look across all mammals, the range of investment is just staggering. You've got those animals with internal tests, which point to a different thermal strategy, maybe a lower need for volume. But then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Like the dolphin example from the source. That was mind-blowing.
So it's an extreme commitment, right? For certain species of dolphins or whales, the testes can be up to 4% of their total body weight.
4%.
4%. Just try to picture that in human terms. For an average guy, that would be like 6 or 7 pounds dedicated solely to the testes. It just hammers home that size is a direct measure of reproductive strategy and how intense the competition is.
And it really throws into sharp relief why humans, who are, pretty big mammals, only allocate a tiny fraction of that, but we still need that high-risk external placement.
Exactly. It means we sort of settled on a size that is optimized for our specific and relatively low-intensity mating environment.
So the external position is the fixed cost. That's mandatory because of the heat.
Right. That's the price of admission for viable sperm.
Yeah.
But once you pay that price, the variable part, the size from tiny to massive, that just reflects the competitive environment. So now we have to zoom back in on the primates to really set the benchmark for that competition.
Okay, let's go back to those incredible numbers for the great apes. And we have to keep stressing, this is all adjusted for body weight. This is about relative investment, not just absolute size.
And when you normalize for that, the picture of our evolutionary path just snaps right into focus.
Hmm.
On one extreme, you have the gorilla, the quintessential example of high dominance, low competition mating. The male gorilla has a strict harem, he faces almost no sperm competition, and therefore he has incredibly small tests for his massive body, the smallest of all the great apes.
And humans, surprisingly, are 3 times larger than that, which suggests what?
Hmm.
That even though we're not, wildly promiscuous, our ancestors must have faced more sperm competition than a gorilla in his harem.
Precisely. We are in the middle ground. But then you get to the chimpanzee. They are physically smaller than us, but their reproductive commitment is just colossal. Again, our organs are only 1/5 the size of a chimp's relative to their weight.
Wow.
That massive size in chimps is just undeniable proof of the intense, almost chaotic sperm warfare that defines how they mate.
So we have this massive 15-fold gradient. It goes from the low investment gorilla through the moderate investment human, all the way to the extreme investment chimpanzee.
Hmm.
What are the two opposing forces that create this huge divergence in where the energy goes?
Well, this variation, it's like the Rosetta Stone for understanding our mating strategies. It points to the two major evolutionary pressures that are in a constant tug of war for the body's finite resources.
The two modes of sexual selection.
The two modes of sexual selection. And these two modes determine whether your energy budget goes into, let's say, advertising or into manufacturing.
Okay, let's define those two poles because they're critical. Pre-mating selection, this is the game before mating, right? The competition for access. It's all about visual and auditory signals.
That is the heart of it. Pre-mating selection is all about maximizing your success before copulation even happens. It favors traits that signal genetic quality, physical dominance, superior health.
Things that let one male either physically push rivals away or just be seen as more desirable by the female.
Exactly. And the sources use this brilliant term for these displays. They call them badges of status. They are signals, and they're costly, which is why they're usually honest signals.
The cost is the key. It has to take a lot of metabolic effort to grow and maintain, otherwise any male could fake it.
Right. If your badge is impressive, a giant rack of antlers, bright plumage, or, a massive nose, it does two things. It intimidates your rivals, and it attracts mates.
And the animal kingdom is just full of these wild examples.
Oh, absolutely. Take the proboscis monkey. Their defining feature is that huge hanging nose.
Okay.
It's cumbersome, it's expensive to grow, it seems totally impractical. But the males, with the biggest, most dominant-looking noses, have way higher mating success. It's a literal billboard advertising their fitness.
Which confirms that the female sees that nose and thinks, okay, this guy can afford that ridiculous energy cost and still be healthy.
Exactly. Or look at orangutans. The dominant males, they grow these massive, fleshy cheek flanges called pads. They turn their face into this huge dish shape.
I've seen pictures of that. It's incredible.
It is. And those flanges are energy sinks. They signal peak maturity, high dominance, and they correlate directly with reproductive access. The same principle is at play with the gelada monkeys and their bright red chest patches. The redder the patch, the more successful the male. In every case, energy is being poured into the physical sign of dominance.
And if we bring this back to humans, the sources suggest that even our subtle traits, like maybe a thick beard or a strong brow ridge, could function as these low-key badges of status.
It definitely fits the evolutionary profile. But here's the key insight, the trade-off. When a male successfully uses these big, energy-intensive status displays to monopolize mating,
The competition changes.
the whole dynamic shifts. He attracts or secures more mates, and that means there's way less competitive pressure after the mating event.
And if there's no competition after mating, you don't need a massive sperm factory.
You don't.
Yeah.
And that allows the species to shift its energy budget away from the manufacturing department's sperm production and invest it back into maintaining the success of the marketing department, the status display. Which brings us right to the other pole,
Post-mating selection.
post-mating selection. This is the battle for fertilization itself.
So this is all about what happens after the event. It's not about access anymore. It's about the outcome. It's sperm quality and, more often than not, just sheer quantity.
Yes, this is the world of sperm competition. This evolutionary arms race gets triggered in any species where females are frequently promiscuous, mating with multiple males in a short fertile window.
The male strategy has to shift.
It has to. The only game in town is to maximize your chances of fertilization by basically overwhelming the competition with volume.
Which brings us right back to the chimpanzee. The massive proportional size we see in them is the end result of this intense sperm competition.
The chimp is the perfect case study. Their social world is fluid, multi-male, multi-female. A female might mate, I don't know, dozens of times in a single day with different partners. The only way a male can ensure his genes get passed on is to produce a massive volume of highly competitive sperm.
And that intense pressure is what drives the evolution of these huge testicles and higher sperm production.
Exactly, which is why their tests are so enormous compared to ours, or especially the gorillas.
So to synthesize this, the gorilla basically chose the pre-mating dominance strategy and ended up with tiny tests. The
Hmm.
chimp went all in on the post-mating quantity strategy and has huge tests. And humans are somewhere in the middle, which suggests a history of, what, moderate monogamy mixed with some level of competition.
That is the core conclusion. The male who successfully invests in strong pre-mating advantages, like the orangutan with his cheek flanges, he faces way less need for high sperm volume. And over evolutionary time, that reduction in post-mating competition allows the species to divert energy, and the physical result is that testicle size shrinks over generations.
It's a zero-sum game played with biological resources.
It is, absolutely.
And this concept, this biological energy budget, is what makes the whole thing so elegant.
It's the central organizing principle.
The organism has this finite pool of resources, calories, hormones, whatever, and it has to be distributed. You just can't have it all. You can't maximize your status display and your sperm output at the same time.
It's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And the relationship between these two things, the badge and the sperm, is remarkably and consistently inverse. You see it across the entire animal kingdom.
So let's just lay it out as clearly as possible. If you pour energy into expensive visual or auditory dominance traits,
There's just less biological resource available for developing the testes and manufacturing sperm.
and on the flip side, if the species priority is maximizing sperm production to win that internal competition,
Then there's less energy and, frankly, less evolutionary pressure for those big, costly status displays. The body is always forced to specialize.
which is why that memorable summary from the researchers is so perfect. It's almost like a law of biology.
I love that line.
Large nose, small balls. Large cheek flanges, small balls.
It just perfectly captures the energetic reality. If you've already paid for your status badge, the big nose, the dominant body size, a huge vocal sac, you've already secured access. Your biological budget is now constrained from also investing heavily in sperm volume.
And the examples aren't just visual, which I think is fascinating. They're auditory. And that gives us this amazing bridge to the human experience.
The howler monkey case.
Yes, the howler monkey. It's such a brilliant example of prioritizing sound over, well, substance.
It's a stunning illustration of the trade-off. Howler monkeys, they get their name because they invest just tremendous amount of energy into these incredibly loud, deep mating calls.
And that call is the badge. It's for defending territory, intimidating rivals, all without a physical fight.
Exactly. And the research found that the males with the loudest, most impressive vocal abilities, their auditory badge of status, also had the smallest testicles relative to their size.
They're literally paying for that loud voice with their reproductive capacity. What does that look like physically in the monkey? What's the cost?
Oh, the physical cost is enormous. To get that booming, resonant call, the males have to develop and maintain a hugely enlarged hyoid bone. That's a structure in the throat that anchors the vocal cords and all the associated air sacs.
Wow.
That takes metabolic resources to build and to maintain. So the energy goes into building the voice box and the lung capacity, and it comes at the direct, measurable expense of investing in testicular mass.
Okay, now connect this back to humans, because there's a parallel here that is just, it's mind-blowing.
This is where it gets really interesting.
We see the same deep trade-off embedded in our own traits, specifically the relationship between voice pitch and fertility.
It is the human confirmation of the howler monkey strategy. Studies have confirmed that men with deeper voices, which, are pretty universally seen as an attractive trait, signaling higher testosterone, dominance, maturity,
Right.
they tend to have lower sperm counts. It's the human version of the large voice, small testes trade-off.
Let's get into the mechanics of that. Why is that trade-off mandatory? It's not a coincidence, it's hormonal.
It is absolutely rooted in the hormonal system. The deep voice is a secondary sexual characteristic.
Right.
A badge. It's primarily driven by high levels of testosterone during puberty. That thickens and lengthens the vocal cords.
Hmm.
However, high circulating testosterone, the very thing that creates the deep voice, also creates a feedback loop in the pituitary gland.
Meaning the body sort of sees all this testosterone and thinks, okay, job done. We've got enough hormones for reproduction.
That's a great way to put it. The pituitary gland responds to that high circulating testosterone by suppressing the release of two key hormones you need for sperm production, LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone.
And those are the master signals that tell the testicles to actually produce sperm.
They're the go signal for the factory floor.
Hmm.
So if your high testosterone status badge is actively suppressing those signals, the factory slows down. And the measurable result is a lower sperm count.
So your voice depth, a trait we associate with attractiveness and dominance, is hormonally expensive enough that the very mechanism creating the badge is also inhibiting the manufacturing of sperm.
The badge costs you metabolic resources, and it suppresses the hormonal signals for maximum output. It just shows the depth of the evolutionary commitment. Your body has physically and hormonally specialized.
It's made a choice.
It's made an explicit choice. Maximize the hormonal signal of dominance, the deep voice, even if it means sacrificing peak fertility output. These things we see on the surface, beards, noses, voices, they're not trivial. They're visible signs of these profound, energetically expensive, and mutually exclusive biological commitments.
The physiological trade-off between status and sperm is already so compelling. But now we have to pivot to what might be an even more surprising finding: how this evolutionary sizing connects directly to human social behavior, and, most strikingly, to paternal involvement.
Yeah, this takes the science from the purely physiological end and brings it into the social and behavioral realm. Recent research has looked at the consequences of these underlying reproductive strategies on, modern human family life.
And they found correlations that are, well, pretty direct. They link testicle size to the effort men put into raising their own children.
The study findings were very clear and quite provocative. The research measured active parental investment, so things like changing diapers, feeding the kids, bathing them, reading to them, direct care.
All the hands-on stuff.
All the hands-on stuff. And the conclusion was undeniable. Men with larger testicles spend less time actively caring for children or performing those specific household duties.
And conversely,
men with smaller testicles tend to be more nurturing, more involved fathers. They invest significantly more hours in that direct, hands-on care.
that is a remarkable finding. But it seems almost too clean. How did the study control for things like culture or economic status?
That's the first question you have to ask. And the researchers were meticulous about controlling for variables. They used neuroimaging, fMRI scans, while the fathers looked at pictures of their children. They measured hormone levels. They had self-reported and partner-reported data on paternal effort.
So multiple sources of data.
Multiple sources. And the correlation held strong even after adjusting for things like income, marital status, or social attitudes about parenting. The key was that the brain regions associated with parental motivation and reward were significantly more active in the men with smaller testicles.
Which suggests that a man's underlying evolutionary strategy, the choice between a maximal sperm production strategy indicated by larger size versus a strategy favoring investment in fewer offspring with smaller size, is still reflected in his modern behavior.
It implies this powerful link between the underlying physiology and the behavioral output. If the body is metabolically and hormonally geared for, let's call it a quantity strategy.
Maximizing procreation.
Right. Then it naturally allocates less energy and motivation toward the high-cost quality strategy of intensive paternal care.
Is there a hypothesized neurobiological reason for that? Like, if a deep voice suppresses FSH, is there a similar hormonal mechanism at play with parenting?
There's a strong hypothesis, and it involves testosterone fluctuation. For males of many species, successful caregiving often requires a temporary or even a permanent downshift in testosterone.
Because high testosterone drives competition and mating pursuit.
And low testosterone allows for more focused attention and nurturing behavior.
Yeah.
It sort of quiets the competitive drive.
Okay, so men with larger testicles, a factory that's optimized for high output and potentially a higher baseline of testosterone needed for competition, they might find it hormonally more difficult for their T levels to drop low enough to really engage in those non-competitive acts of caregiving.
That's exactly the idea. The physiological setup designed to maximize fertilization chances might be, on some level, incompatible with the hormonal profile you need for intensive long-term paternal investment. The smaller test size might reflect a system that's either already at a lower, less competitive hormonal baseline, Or maybe one that's just more flexible and capable of those hormonal shifts needed for bonding and nurturing.
And this isn't just some weird human quirk. We can actually reinforce this by looking at other primates, which gives this whole correlation a really robust evolutionary backbone.
This is where comparative anatomy is so powerful. When we look across primate mating systems, the trend is crystal clear. Mating systems and testicle size are inseparable.
So, monogamous species?
Monogamous species, where a male's reproductive success depends entirely on the survival of his one partner's offspring, they have the smallest testicles relative to their size.
Like the gorilla again. He has almost no sperm competition, but he has to defend his group to ensure his few offspring survive.
Exactly. And you see it in other species too, like certain New World monkeys, where paternal investment is absolutely critical. In those systems, the male's main evolutionary driver isn't sperm quantity, it's quality of care. So the biological energy gets funneled into maintenance and protection, not a huge sperm factory.
Whereas species with highly promiscuous multi-male mating systems, like macaques or the chimps we talked about, they require that enormous reproductive investment to compete.
Which means larger testes. So let's just formalize this trend we see in the human paternal data. Smaller testicles correlate with a biological inclination toward a system that requires higher parental investment.
And larger testicles correlate with an inclination toward maximizing promiscuity and just overall fertilization chances.
The size basically embodies the evolutionary choice between quality investing heavily in the success of the offspring, or yours, and quantity maximizing the total number of fertilization events you can achieve.
So the size isn't random at all. It reflects this long-term strategy that's tailored for reproductive success, which then dictates social roles and how much you invest in your kids.
And it makes perfect metabolic sense. I mean, caring for children is arguably one of the most energetically demanding things a father can do. If a male is already allocating massive energy to maintaining a huge sperm factory or competing for mates, the body just has a finite amount left for nurturing. Biology strongly favors specialization, even in us.
We've spent a lot of time on the competitive side of this, which is fascinating, but we have to circle back to the foundational biology that drives the whole thing.
The cooling system.
The need for cooling. It's such a remarkable piece of evolutionary engineering.
It's the ultimate design constraint. The whole reason for the external placement is that sperm production is optimized only within this remarkably narrow and cool thermal window. It has to be significantly lower than core body temperature.
Specifically, what, 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius below core?
Yeah. Exactly. 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius below core body temperature. Any higher than that, and sperm viability, sperm quality, it just plummets.
And that tight thermal requirement is what forced the invention of the scrotum, this high-risk external solution that has to act like a radiator and a thermostat at the same time, no matter what the weather is like.
It is a marvel of engineering. Evolution created this complex, autonomous cooling system. We can actually detail the 3 primary mechanisms that let it maintain that precise 3-degree difference so well.
Okay, let's start with the most visible one, the skin itself.
Right. So first you've got the thin scrotal skin and something called the dartos muscle. The skin is uniquely structured to dissipate heat really efficiently. And the dartos muscle is a sheet of smooth muscle right under the skin. When it gets cold, it contracts. That makes the scrotal skin wrinkle up and thicken, which reduces the surface area and minimizes heat loss. When it's hot, it relaxes, which smooths the skin out and increases surface area for cooling.
So it's like an immediate passive thermal adjuster.
Exactly. But the second mechanism is arguably the most ingenious part, the vascular countercurrent exchange. We can't just name it. We have to explain how this biological air conditioner actually works.
Okay, break it down for us.
This is all about the pampiniform plexus. It's this dense, intricate network of veins that surrounds the testicular artery. Now, the artery is bringing warm blood down from the core of the body toward the testes.
Right.
But the plexus, this network of veins carrying cooler, returning blood away from the testes, wraps tightly around that warm artery.
So the cool blood going back up to the body essentially pre-cools the warm blood coming down before it even gets to the delicate sperm-producing areas.
You got it. Heat transfers across the walls of those closely packed vessels. This countercurrent heat exchange creates a thermal gradient. The cooler venous blood draws heat away from the warmer arterial blood. It ensures that by the time that arterial blood reaches the testicles, its temperature has already dropped by that crucial 2.5 to 3 degrees.
It's a highly efficient heat exchanger that doesn't require any extra energy.
Not at all. And then the third mechanism is the active positioning control. This is the one we actually see in action. This is the cremaster muscles.
That's the dynamic thermostat function?
Yes, the cremaster muscles are skeletal muscles that attach the testes to the body. When the ambient temperature drops a lot, they contract vigorously, pulling the testicles up closer to the warm pelvic cavity to conserve heat.
And if the body is overheating or it's a hot day, they relax.
They relax, letting the testicles drop further away from the body for maximum air exposure and heat dissipation. It's a completely autonomous, muscularly controlled temperature system, constantly adjusting position all day long.
It's also interesting how the system has these little optimization features built in, like the physical asymmetry that we often see.
Yes, the sources note that to further maximize cooling and just prevent them from heating each other up, evolution favored a simple structural solution: asymmetry.
One hangs lower than the other.
One testicle, and it's usually the left, hangs lower than the right. And that staggering isn't random. It's a strategic geometric optimization. It ensures they don't rest directly against each other, which maximizes the cooling surface area for each one independently.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the natural process of aging in this system. Men often notice a change in the structure over time, what's often described as increased sagging or droopiness. This is just a normal part of aging, but why is it so prominent here?
It's a direct result of the loss of structural proteins throughout the whole body. But the scrotum, which relies so heavily on tautness and muscular tone for its job, is particularly susceptible to these age-related changes. As men get older, the crucial elements that provide that structural integrity, mainly collagen and elastin, they naturally degrade and decrease.
And collagen provides the firmness, elastin provides the snapback. So when those decrease, the skin just loses its ability to hold its position.
That's it exactly. The decrease in elasticity means the skin stretches more easily, and the muscle tone of that dartos muscle naturally slackens, which leads to greater sagging. It's simply the system losing the collagen support it needs to stay taut. It's a sign of the body's broader loss of connective tissue integrity over time.
And I imagine even the degree of that is subject to just anatomical variance from person to person.
Oh, absolutely. Men born with longer spermatic cords or maybe a naturally looser dartos muscle tone might experience a more pronounced change. But structurally, the underlying cause is universal. The finely tuned skin and muscle system is gradually losing its protein support, which just illustrates the body's constant state of change and entropy.
What resonates most with me after all this is how a simple anatomical question, about size and placement, stuff we rarely think about, just opens up this profound narrative. We've gone from comparative anatomy to hormonal feedback loops and all the way to behavioral psychology.
Well, the core conclusion is pretty undeniable. The human scrotum is not some simple biological fixture. It is a microcosm of evolutionary trade-offs, and it is an exceptionally finely tuned system for temperature regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Its size reflects this monumental evolutionary choice, our species mating strategy, the intensity of reproductive competition our ancestors faced, and, astonishingly, it seems to continue to dictate these deep-seated behavioral tendencies toward parenting today.
And we've covered these incredible, sometimes counterintuitive connections. The energy cost of a deep voice or a thick beard actually suppressing sperm production.
Wow.
The mandatory trade-off between the status display and the manufacturing output. And that direct correlation between organ size and a man's motivation to actively change a diaper or read a bedtime story. The humble testicle really does offer this unique, quantified mirror into our biological and our social evolution.
It's a system that's been optimized for long-term survival and reproductive success within a very specific social structure. Its placement, its sophisticated temperature controls, its size, they're all specialized evolutionary solutions designed to maximize the transfer of genes in the most efficient way possible. And that means either prioritizing volume or prioritizing individual offspring care.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. If we accept this science, that testicle size is directly tied to reproductive strategy, with smaller sizes favoring paternal investment and larger sizes favoring competition and quantity, what does that imply for the future of human physical evolution?
Well, the research does hint that this evolution is still ongoing. Modern society is changing so rapidly. We have declining birth rates. We have increasingly fluid family structures. Technology is fundamentally changing how we reproduce. If humans continue to lean heavily into intensive biparental care as the main strategy for offspring success, rather than, say, promiscuity, then that biological energy trade-off suggests a future where, over immense timescales, the smaller size, the investment strategy, might be further favored by natural selection.
So, could our modern social choices, our commitment to quality parenting, continue to exert this subtle selection pressure on the anatomy of the reproductive system itself? It really makes you wonder how the social decisions we're all making today might physically manifest centuries down the line, constantly recalibrating that biological energy budget for the next generation.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're examining one of the most remarkable instances of adaptive evolution in mammals, the extraordinary variation in the size and positioning of male reproductive anatomy. This variation across species, especially within primates, is just staggering. Human testicles are external, which right away sets us apart from a lot of large mammals like elephants. But they also sit at a very specific size relative to our body weight.
And that specific size is really the crux of the issue, isn't it? When we adjust for body weight, human testes are about 3 times larger than a silverback gorilla's, but then they're a mere fifth the size of a chimpanzee's. That whole spectrum, from the gorilla's tiny investment to the chimp's massive output, well, it tells a pretty clear story about intense evolutionary pressure.
It absolutely does. And the story we're debating today is what constitutes that dominant evolutionary pressure, especially in shaping Homo sapiens. So we're focusing on this central question. Is the human system primarily dictated by an inverse relationship between status signaling traits and fertility, what we're calling the evolutionary trade-off, which then governs our entire reproductive strategy, including, how we parent?
Or is the size variation we observe predominantly a direct result of the intensity of post-mating sexual selection, what we term sperm competition, which is then mediated by these critical, non-negotiable biological necessities, particularly temperature constraints? I'm going to hold that competition and constraint are the dominant forces here, dictating both function and structure.
And I'll be arguing that the energy allocation, that deep evolutionary trade-off between investing in physical status versus sperm production, is really the foundational explanatory mechanism for the morphology and behavior we see today.
All right, so let's establish why this energy trade-off is such a powerful model for you.
Well, my core thesis is built on a simple energetic reality. Evolutionarily speaking, resources are finite. So when a species invests heavily in pre-mating badges of status, I'm talking about traits that advertise fitness, dominance, desirability before any copulation happens. That energy has to come from somewhere. And that source, more often than not, is the reproductive machinery itself. This necessary diversion of energy results in smaller testicular development and maintenance. And this trade-off, it isn't a side effect. It's the central strategy.
I can concede the concept of a biological budget, of course, but I challenge the idea that this trade-off is the primary driver determining the final size.
But the evidence for this prioritization is incredibly clear across the animal kingdom. We observe a general maxim in species with high levels of male-male competition decided by status: large nose, small balls; large cheek flanges, small balls. Just think of the howler monkeys, the ones investing resources into developing those incredibly loud mating calls, a very effective status badge to deter rivals. They have demonstrably the smallest testes in their genus. That's a direct, measurable diversion of energy right there.
Okay, and how does that translate to humans? Because, let's be honest, we don't have cheek flanges or giant proboscis noses.
No, but we've evolved far more subtle, yet still energetically demanding status badges. The male deep voice is a prime example. It's consistently perceived as a desirable and dominant trait. And studies examining the physiology beneath this trait, they confirm the trade-off is active in Homo sapiens. A deeper voice is underpinned by a specific pattern of testosterone allocation, and that investment correlates very strongly with lower circulating sperm counts. The energy required to build and maintain the thicker vocal cords and the associated musculature is energy that's just not allocated to optimizing the seminiferous tubules. It's an evolutionary choice: win the girl with the voice or win the subsequent sperm race with volume. You generally don't get to do both optimally.
That's a compelling point regarding the human voice, I'll give you that. But it still frames size reduction as the sort of default outcome of energy redirection. And it overlooks the massive countervailing force.
My core thesis is that testicle size is primarily a direct reflection of the intensity of post-mating sexual selection, the sheer demand imposed by sperm competition. This biological arms race for quantity and quality, which happens after mating when females are promiscuous, is the most intense selective pressure, and it fundamentally dictates size.
But the competition pressure is itself a response to the mating strategy.
Precisely. But the size tracks the intensity of that competition far more closely than the energy allocated to some status badge. Look at our primate contrast. Chimpanzees operate under a polygyny-androus system. Females mate with multiple partners in a short period. This intense sperm competition demands maximum output. Hence, their testes are 5 times the size of ours. Now, you consider the gorilla, who maintains a strong pre-mating dominant system. A large silverback defends a small harem, and that virtually eliminates post-mating competition. So what do they have? The smallest testes. The intensity of competition, not just the energy cost of the gorilla's massive physique, is the direct mechanism that allows the size to shrink.
That explains the shrinking, yes, I'll grant you that, but your model also seems to minimize a fundamental biological reality, the non-negotiable constraint.
The reason human testicles are external is purely functional. It's temperature regulation. Sperm production is highly sensitive, and it's optimized at about 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius below our core body temperature. That necessity demands specialized, energetically costly anatomical machinery. You've got thin scrotal skin for radiation, the cremaster muscles for vertical positioning, and these complex vascular systems. These are mandatory adaptations that exist because physics and chemistry demand them, independent of any energy trade-off involving a deep voice or a big nose. Ignoring this essential biological hardware makes the trade-off model feel a bit too simplistic.
We can acknowledge the necessity of the engineering, of course, but let's move beyond the engineering to what it predicts: behavior. The evolutionary trade-off model doesn't just predict morphology, it predicts the entire reproductive lifestyle.
And I think this is the deepest cleavage between our perspectives, the direction of causality when it comes to paternal care.
Exactly. If the evolutionary system decides to prioritize the pre-mating strategy, so investing in status or badges, it structurally reduces the capacity for a post-mating victory, meaning sperm output. This lower investment in sperm machinery, then, necessitates a pivot toward a high parental investment strategy to make sure those few offspring survive. The study showing that men with smaller testicles spend more time caring for children and doing household duties, while men with larger testicles spend less, strongly supports this. The smaller size aligns perfectly with a higher paternal investment, more monogamous strategy, a pattern we see mirrored in species like monogamous colobus monkeys, who have smaller testes than their promiscuous cousins. The size is the architect's plan that dictates the subsequent behavior.
Okay. While I concede this statistical correlation in that parental cheer study is robust, I really have to challenge the interpretation of causality. I argue that the behavioral shift isn't the trade-off actively designing the paternal impulse, but it's more of a strategic consequence of the competition level that's being faced.
How so?
Well, if a male's testicular size, which results from low post-mating competition, is small, he just has a reduced competitive advantage in sperm quantity and quality compared to males from highly competitive environments. The evolutionary pressure then forces a necessary shift in resources away from future mating competition, which, let's face it, he's ill-equipped to win, and toward protecting the existing genetic investment. It's an adaptive pivot, a fallback strategy, that's necessitated by the size reduction, not the energy trade-off actively installing some paternal care software from the ground up. The behavior follows the capacity, and the capacity follows the competition intensity.
But if the initial energy allocation, the trade-off, had prioritized sperm production in the first place, that shift wouldn't be necessary. It all comes back to that initial strategic decision of where to allocate energy.
And that leads perfectly into my structural challenge to the efficacy of your badges of status. You present the trade-off as a strict energy limitation. You must divert. But what if the sheer effectiveness of the badge simply removes the need for the expensive post-mating weaponry?
That sounds like a semantic difference. If the badge removes the need, the energy is freed up, and so the outcome is smaller testicles.
No, it's a crucial distinction about prioritization. The male isn't investing less energy, he's investing it differently, because the pre-mating strategy is so overwhelmingly successful that the pressure for high sperm output just vanishes. Consider the success of traits like the orangutan's massive cheek flanges or the gelada monkey's chest patches. These visual status signals secure mating success before post-mating selection can even start. It is the success of the pre-mating tactic in reducing competition that explains the small testicular size, not a strict constraint forcing the system to shrink.
I would maintain that the success of the badge is the realization of the successful energy balance strategy. Look, evolution is constantly running an optimization calculation. Where does this species get the highest reproductive payoff for its invested energy? For howler monkeys, the payoff came from the loud call, even if it meant sacrificing the ability to win an intense sperm battle. For humans, the payoff might be tied to traits that signal status or provisioning ability. The trade-off is the calculator.
But your model struggles with outliers that seem to break the budget completely. I mean, if the energy balance is so strictly enforced, how do you account for species like certain rodent groups or fruit bats that exhibit both extremely large, dominant status signals and massive testicular output, investing heavily in both sides of your supposed ledger?
Well, those outliers often operate under different ecological constraints, particularly those where female behavior allows for simultaneous selection on multiple traits, or maybe where the badge itself is maintained cheaply relative to the total body mass. But for primates, which rely on metabolically demanding, complex neuro and muscle structures for status display, the choice is clear and finite. We can't let the exceptions disprove the central rule that's governing the vast majority of mammalian mating systems, including our own. The trade-off dictates the strategic norm.
I would argue the outliers prove that the energy budget is not the first principle. The required competitive pressure is. And speaking of first principles, let's get back to the anatomical nuance you dismiss as mere engineering.
I see anatomy as the optimization of the directive.
External placement requires constant biological warfare against heat, which demands incredibly specific anatomical solutions. We're talking about the thin scrotal skin, the cremaster muscles lifting or lowering the testes, and the complex vascular arrangement known as the countercurrent heat exchange.
Okay, explain why the countercurrent exchange is more than just optimization.
Because it's a non-negotiable life support system. The countercurrent heat exchange is where the cooler venous blood returning from the scrotum actively cools the warmer arterial blood that's entering it. This is a system designed to fight thermal death. For sperm, it's not designed to save energy. It's designed to salvage function. Furthermore, factors like the observed asymmetry, the left testicle usually hanging lower than the right, are specific cooling strategies that show the system is struggling to maintain viability against physics, independent of how much energy was allocated to a deep voice. These are not trade-offs. They are immutable biological facts of operating outside the core body.
I agree, these mechanisms are necessary adaptations, but they remain subordinate to the strategic choice. They are solutions within a system whose size and overall strategy, monogamous or polygamous, were already constrained by the energy allocation decision. The trade-off dictates the reproductive size and overall strategy. The anatomy merely dictates the most efficient physical mechanism of function, given that predetermined size and location. I still maintain that anatomy is merely the highly capable plumbing, but evolution is the architect dictating the entire floor plan based on the energetic budget.
And I still insist that the necessity of that plumbing, the cooling system, is so costly and complex that it fundamentally limits the options available to the architect. The constraints themselves become the dominant selective force, particularly when the trade-off model struggles to account for the competitive pressures that define the size differences between, say, a chimp and a gorilla.
That makes perfect sense because your model gives primacy to the immediate competitive pressure, what happens in the female reproductive tract as the ultimate shaper.
Precisely. And in conclusion, while the evolutionary trade-off between status display and fertility is undoubtedly an observable phenomenon that influences morphology, I believe the primary drivers dictating testicular size variation are the demands of post-mating competition, which must always be mediated by those immutable biological constraints like temperature regulation. Understanding the human scrotum means appreciating that it is a finely tuned system that's struggling to balance multiple, sometimes competing selective forces, where necessity often supersedes a mere optimization strategy.
My position remains that the evolutionary trade-off offers the most powerful unifying theory. It doesn't just explain the size differential, but crucially, it connects that size directly to the complex suite of behaviors that define human reproductive success, like paternal investment. The system prioritizes success pre-mating, and the resulting morphology is simply the residual output of that foundational decision, regardless of the necessary engineering required to make that output viable.
The source material is rich because it forces us to choose a hierarchy of causation, doesn't it? Are we driven by the constraints of our biology or by the calculated expenditure of our finite resources?
The human testicle truly is a microcosm of our evolutionary history, reflecting both our deep biological inheritance and our complex social evolution. There is clearly much more work to be done in separating cause from consequence in this field.